Okay then folks, so here we go with another little harmony starting composition task. This one's again a little bit different from the first two. So what we're going to look at here are what we call extended chords. I'm going to try and be a bit experimental with our harmony here. So what are extended chords? Well, here you can see first of all that you've got the triads of C major. So scale of C major written out at the top of the screen up here, with triads over the top. Roman numeral capital letter means it's a major triad. Roman numeral just in sort of normal font means that it's a minor, or in the case of chord 7, a diminished triad. This is what, just to remind you, these sound like when played one after another, just in plain triad shape. What you've got down the bottom here are what we call extended chords, and these are examples of a specific sort of extended chord, which is what's called an added seventh. And the reason they're called added sevenths is really simple. You take the original triad, here is a C major triad, and then over the top of it you add a fourth note, which in this case is a B. As you can see, between the bottom and the top note of the triad, you've got C at the bottom of the triad up to a B at the top of the triad, creating an interval of a seventh. So these are what are called added seventh chords. Here we go. Have a little listen to them. See what they do to the harmony. They add like an extra richness to the harmony, which sounds really, really interesting. So if I just play you a C triad, compare that with the C7 chord, you can hear that the C7 chord in a way is much more interesting. So those are simple extended seventh chords. Next, what I'm doing here is not just playing a chord with an added seventh, I'm adding what's called a ninth as well. So you can see again with the little bracket here, from the C up to the D, this is what's called a ninth. Start on C and count up, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. That's an interval of a ninth. Sometimes these chords are also referred to what you call an added second as well. So never mind counting from C all the way up the scale to a D right above it, you just go literally from C to D. So these are ninths, and we'll come on to what the voicings are in a minute. So these are the four chords at the top of the screen. Now that first one's got the seventh and the ninth in, so you've got your C, E, G, B and D. Now it's quite a dissonant chord, a bit splodgy for want of a better word. So what sometimes you do with these chords is, if you add the ninth in, what you do then is remove the seventh from the chord. So the first chord here has got the seventh in, which is the B, and the ninth in, which is the D. This second example here, I've taken the B out, and it gives you a slightly sparser chord. So that's the second chord there. With the bass note you get. What you've got here with the third, fourth and fourth chord are well, it's just the same chord. It's the same letter names, but this has been what's called revoiced. When you revoice a chord, it means that you take the letter names from the original triad or chord, or extended chord in this case, and you literally move them around. So this example here, you can see the C, E, G triad there. Still see the C, E, G triad here. And what I've done is I've taken the D, which is the added ninth note or second note, and I've put it down the octave, creating a sort of cluster. Sounds like this. And when it's played hopefully quite nicely like that, it's got a really rich sound to it. Over here you've got the same thing, same letter names in the chord, just rearranged. What I've also done here is I've also put the G in the left hand and the right hand. No particular reason why, I just fancied it, thought it might sound quite good. So I'm sort of choosing to sort of add in extra layers of sound by using the same letter more than once sometimes. Here we go. So across the top line here, let me play these four chords in order. So here's the first chord, second chord, third chord, fourth chord. All four chords are essentially the same chord. It's just that I have revoiced them or voiced them in a different way by moving the notes around the keyboard. Now, what I've done here is, and this is using an example from the little worksheet that inspired this sort of topic. And again, the worksheet is available in the class notebook if you want to look at the original idea where this came from. Is I've also gone a bit mad here with some accidentals. And how experimental are they? Well, fairly. And I think what you just got to do here is just got to try some ideas out when you're doing this in Sibelius. You know, some will be a hit, some will be a miss, and it's your judgment as to whether you like the sound of all these chords. So let's have a little listen to the first four chords here, starting C9, D minor 9, E flat 9, F9, and I've just put some flats in to make some of the harmonies a bit more interesting. So here's the first chord, C9. You can hear there, compared with the chord above, in the line above, I've flattened the B flat. Here's the second chord, D minor 9. Here's the E flat 9. This sounds good, this one. Oh, like that. And then F9. So I've just added some flats in to create some chromaticism, just experimenting. Could have added different flats in, different sharps in even. Yep, completely. There are loads of different ways of combining accidentals here. Some will sound weirder than others, and you might not like that weirdness. Some will sound sort of more conventional than others, and you might like that conventionality. It's entirely up to you how you use them. So that was the first four chords here. What I've done again in the second half of the line is same four chords, but I've reordered the notes or revoiced the notes, just like I did up at the top of the screen. So have a little listen to these four chords again, but revoiced. This is from the halfway point to the bottom line. So again, although it's the same chords, they sound completely different because I've reorganised the notes, and it's up to you to play around with how you reorganise them. One little tip I will share with you is that although I do reorganise lots of the notes, what I tend to do is I tend to leave the bass note where it is. At the moment, these chords are all in, if you remember, what we call root position. So if it's a C chord of any description, the bass note's a C. If it's a D chord of any description, the bass note's a D, and so on and so forth. You can mess around with that as well if you want, but you're really opening up a whole realm of different harmonic possibilities, and it's going to get quite complicated. That's up to you if you want to mess with it. All my examples here, I've pretty much kept the root note at the bottom of the chord. Okay, so again, taking inspiration from the worksheet that set this task going, what I've done here is messed with some other bits of harmony. The first one here, these are quartal harmonies, a bit like we looked at last week, so you could experiment more with those. So these are the two quartal harmonies. Same chord revoiced. Now, what we've got here with the second bar, the third bar and the fourth bar are what are called interlocking chords. So what you've got here in the first bar is you've got an interval of a fourth between the C and the F, and next to it an interval of the fifth between the D and the G, and then all I've done over here is put both of those intervals together into one chord, and when you look at it like that, it's going to be pretty dissonant sounding. The other thing is that I've stuck a C pedal note, sort of give it a sort of rooted tonic feel in the bass. So here's the C and F, here's the D and G, and here's all of them together. And this is what it sounds like, the interlocking fourth bar again played over a C bass. Really interesting sounding harmony. Same idea with the interlocking fifths. I've got a D and an A to start with, then a G and a D to start after it, sorry, and then I've combined the two together. Have a little listen to this one. So we've got again, it's pretty unusual sounding harmony. It's very experimental, but why not? And then interlocking sixths. This is the last bar, so you've got C and A, and then a D and a B. and then I've combined them together. This is going to create a lovely dissonant harmony. So those are different ways of playing around with different sorts of intervals to create different sorts of chords. Those, of course, are none of them based on triad shapes at all. So you can have a little mess around with different chord shapes and styles like that, and that's what I've done in the piece that I've written, which we'll come to in a minute. So all of this so far has just been about experimenting with harmony and creating chords in different ways. Okay. Now, here is another really unusual way of doing it. So what I've done, the first example here is I've superimposed a chord of C with a chord of A flat. So here's the C chord, here's the A flat chord, and when you put the two over the top of each other, this is this minim chord here, you create this sound. Oh, I like that chord. It's a really scrunchy chord. Here it is with a C in the bass as well. So if I play them all together, you've got. Sounds somehow a bit John Williamsy, a bit Star Warsy. Originally, this idea came from a piece that I know I've played to before in class called Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. So it's composed well over 100 years ago now, but it's really modern sounding, really dissonant. So this first harmony here is, well, he's written it out as an F flat major harmony, which is a crazy way of writing it. Really, it's a chord of E major. And you'll notice when I play it, it is deliberately written down low in the bass. It's followed by an E flat 7 chord. And both chords are standard chords, but what Stravinsky then does is he then plonks them on top of each other, which gives you a really muddy, dramatic sound. And this is a little snippet of how he uses them in the piece, and it creates a really quite aggressive, angry, really dissonant sound. And that technique is used a lot in that piece, and it's a piece full of loads of dissonant harmony. It really was a groundbreaking piece of music, and it still sounds so modern and fresh today. So there's another really like quirky, fairly crazy way of creating different chords. What's interesting about this way is that although it's incredibly dissonant, of course, these are still triad shapes. It's just because they're not related to each other, particularly, they sound really dissonant. Now, we've composed so far, hopefully, two 16-bar little tasks, and here is a third 16-bar task. I'll just go through the instructions quickly. What I suggest you do is, again, you write 4 lines of 4 bars and think of it as a sort of A-A-B, A1 structure. So line 1 and line 2 are the same, line 3 is different, and line 4 is the same or very similar to lines 1 and 2. When you're writing a series of different lines like that, it's easy just to think about the first 4 bars and not to link bar 4 into bar 5. So that's just what my second bullet point's on about there, but I'm going to come back to that later in this little presentation. My line 3 is contrasting. So my line 3, I'm going to create contrast in line 3 by using a different tonic. And then I'm going to be experimental, but I'm also going to use my ear. I'm not just slapped any old note in here in Sibelius. I've thought about it carefully. And if you don't like what you're creating, then change it. So how have I gone about doing this? Well, if I'm honest with you, because I'm sort of fairly conventional in my musical outlook, what I've started by doing is writing some actually fairly ordinary plain triads in C major. So this is what my plain triads sound like in C. Have a little listen. This chord sequence is what you might call sort of bog standard. It goes like this. Nothing terribly exciting there. But then what I've done is I've taken that chord sequence and I have altered it with either adding or extending notes to the chords, like this C with the added second here, or the D minor 7 here. And then chords like these two here, the F minor 1, G minor 1, I've obviously added accidentals in as well to add a sort of sense of chromaticism and some sort of different harmonic colour to it. So here is the chord sequence that I played before, but with the extended triad shapes and also with accidentals. See what you think of this. There you go. I don't mind that at all. I quite like it. Sorry, it's not very modest, but anyway, there you go. I'm quite pleased with that for something I just experimented with in Sibelius quickly. So that was my first line attempt, sort of like, you know, in rough sketch. What I've then done is I've then reworked the chords. You'll notice that the chord symbols here are exactly the same here as they are over here, but what I've done is revoiced and reshaped the chord. Why have I done that? Well, I've done it for a couple of reasons. I've done it because I'm trying to like spread the chords out across the piano keyboard a bit more. So I've got a bit of a spread with a couple of notes in the left hand and 3 notes in the right hand. And I've stuck to that pattern pretty much all the way through the sequence, not absolutely. The other thing I'm doing is I'm also thinking about the top note of each chord, in this case G, then A, then C, then D, and then C, D, C, B flat, forming some sort of very simple melodic shape. And I just wanted something that I thought melodically worked quite nicely. So here is line 1, but the extended triads with the accidentals revoiced or reshaped. I think it sounds a bit more musical this way than the previous sequence. Have a listen. There you go. Now, line 1 and line 3, I want to compare the two lines. Remembering line 2 is going to be pretty much the same as line 1. I think I've revoiced it in my final version, but it's the same chord sequence completely, just perhaps revoiced again for a second time. Here's line 3. Now, line 3, I've gone a bit more experimental here. So what I've done is I've done the first half of the line. So these 2 bars here, I've used the superimposed, I've used the 6th interval and created an interval of the 6th in both hands, not the same notes though, and I've just moved down in parallel and back up in parallel. That's the first half of the line. Then the second half of the line is I've used superimposed triads. So in the left hand here, I've got an F sharp minor triad and I've got a D major triad in the right hand. Here in the left hand, I've got a sort of C sharp minor triad. Over the top of it, I've got the F sharp minor triad. Here I've got an E flat triad in the bass and an F triad in the right hand, and here I've got a sort of G triad in the left hand and then an F major triad in the right hand. So I really am picking 2 contrasting triads and superimposing them over the top of each other. This line's definitely more experimental than the first 2. Have a little listen to this one. I really like the parallel motion at the start. I think that works well. If I'd had my time again, I might have kept that going for the whole line, but I'm trying to show some different techniques. Bottom line is that this is completely contrasting with lines 1, 2 and 4. I'd suggested that you like based it around a different tonic. If I'm honest with you, I'm not really sure what my tonic is here. I suppose there's a sort of loose F sharp in the bass that comes a few times. Bar 1 in the line starts in an F sharp, bar 2 starts in an F sharp, and bar 3 starts in F sharp. But I've not really worried too much about the tonic note. I've definitely pushed the boat out a bit more in terms of the experimentation I've used in this third line. The last line. So we're coming back obviously to the same or very similar chord sequence to the opening two lines, but in order for the piece to finish, I have gone back to something harmonically more conventional here. What I did with lines 1 and 2 is I sort of finished the whole line, so the last chord of the line, on a sort of dominant-y type chord. If C was my original tonic, this is based on the note G over here. And so I've sort of like done that, and then that led quite nicely into the next line. What I've done in the line in line 4 is I've finished the line on a chord of C on what was my original sort of loose tonic. And in order to wrap the piece up nicely, what I then did was I changed the penultimate chord to be a chord of G. And that means that I'm going sort of G to C in a sort of 5-to-1 perfect cadencey type way. But remember, this is not the sort of conventional perfect cadence that you've got. So have a listen to line 2 first, which has a feeling at the end of the line like it wants to sort of like carry on to the next one. And then have a listen to the 4th line. So this is line 2. And I hope you can feel there's a sensation that you want the music to continue into the next line at the end of line 2. Now, compare that with line 4. So obviously the start of the line is identical, but hopefully you can hear a sort of like attempt to wrap up the chord sequence at the end, especially if I put a little writ in and pause in the last chord. It gives the music that sensation of it finishing. There you go. And I definitely think that that has a sort of a like finality to it because of that 5-to-1 relationship that I've used. So there we go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to perform for you the whole piece all the way through, and I'm just going to play each chord as a minim, just like I have done so far. Hopefully what you'll hear is a sort of sense that the chord progression is sort of going in a good direction. And the reason why that happens is because lines 1, 2 and 4, if you remember right back when I started talking about how I was putting this piece together, I used a sort of fairly reasonably straightforward triad sort of chord sequence to build my more exciting chords on. Line 3, I did just push the boat out and go for a few different chord shapes. So here we go. Have a little listen to the whole piece played all the way through. Now, what I've done to finish with is I'm going to play the same piece through one more time, but this time I've said, well, rhythmic elaboration. This is a mixture of just trying to like not just play boring minims, but to try and sort of, sometimes I'm going to repeat the chord, sometimes instead of repeat it I might spread the chord or put an arpeggio in, or just a little sort of like more fancy rhythm. In order to do this, I'm going to probably take the tempo a little bit slower, partly because it allows me to play it, because I'm playing on a rubbishy keyboard here with no sustain pedal, but also it gives a little bit more space and time for the little rhythmic ideas to work through. In Sibelius, you can obviously mess around with clicking in different rhythmic patterns, mess around with the voicings, be experimental with this. Don't just try and write something terribly conventional. And try and create some unusual harmonic sounds. Remember, whilst making them unusual, use your ear wisely. If to you the harmonies sound really too much or too weird, or just aren't working, then obviously alter them, have a mess around. Some chords will work better than others, and you really need to experiment about here just to see how this goes. Okay, so be patient with yourself and see how you get on with it. Okay, so have a little listen to my final piece. One final really quick but important Sibelius tip, and this is to do with the chord symbols that I've created. So here's one of the series of chords that I've written earlier, and this is how you can get Sibelius to notate the chord symbols for you. You don't have to really understand what the chord symbols are. I'm not going to get worried too much about the theory of them, but I think it's quite nice if you know what they are and they are labelled for you. So the first thing I do is I click to highlight the first bar there. And it's very important that you also include the bass clef in this as well. And so I hold shift down on my keyboard, not my piano keyboard, the computer keyboard, and I click in the last bar of the line to highlight both the left and the right hand together. Then I come up to text at the top of the screen, and I then come across over here where it says plugin. Now my screen is quite a large screen, which means that the whole of the ribbon displays here. If you can't see plugin, it might be that it's hidden on the right hand side of the screen. So you need to look for that plugin, but you must be on the text tab for this. If you go onto the plugins on a different tab, it won't work. And you go to plugin and you go add chord symbols. And there's a big menu here that comes up. I don't know what any of this means really. I just click OK. And it puts them in. There you go, chord symbols done for you. So if you want to add the actual symbols of the chords that you've written, and then you can look at them and see if it makes any sense to you, that's another little thing that you can do. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how creative you can get with this one. And then after this, if you've had to go at all three tasks, then what you're going to do is choose one of them and extend it into a longer piece. So anyway, that's the last thing with this to finish with. Get composing, folks.